xác người nằm trôi sông phơi trên ruộng đồng, trên nóc nhà thành phố, trên những đường quanh co. Xác nào là em tôi dưới hố hầm này, trong những vùng lửa cháy, bên những vùng ngô khói.
Vietnam, 50 years of forgetting, coming soon on Al Jazeera.
This is what China calls law enforcement, using clubs, knives and water cannons against the Philippine Navy and Coast Guard.
If the Philippines challenges sovereignty of China, China has no choice but to respond like that.
The Philippines calls it piracy.
They are not just pirates, they are typical bully state. They are trying to justify this aggressive, unlawful and barbaric actions just because they have the capability to do it.
China has long claimed almost 90% of the South China Sea, militarizing reefs and islands that other countries claim as their own. But it's become increasingly aggressive, openly attacking boats from rival countries that come close.
What they ultimately want is for other countries to concede by putting pressure, by harassing, by wearing down the opponent.
How far will China go, and could it stumble into war?
This is Chinese Naval Warship 552. You are violating China's terror airspace. Leave now. Leave immediately.
On this episode of 101 East, we enter the strangest battleground in Asia.
Oh my God!
And see firsthand how dangerous this contest has become.
Chinese military helicopter. You are flying too close. You are endangering the lives of our crew.
Subic Bay on the Philippine side of the South China Sea was, until recently, a good place to be a fisherman. George Pieselbon and his crew could sail to a rich breeding ground called Scarborough Shoal in just over a day.
Yung isa kong anak, college na. Yung pangalawa, high school. Tapos yung isa, grade 2. Napag-aral ko naman dahil diyan sa hanap buhay ko sa Scarborough. Nakakaraos kami pa sa pang-araw-araw.
For the past year, nobody from this fishing community has dared go there, and they may never be able to again.
Ang ginagawa nila, hinuwangwangan nila kami. Tapos pag sa gabi naman, yung searchlight malakas, masakit sa mata. Tapos yung wangwang nila, masakit din sa tainga. Parang bubundulin na yung bangka namin dahil lalapit sila dito sa bangka eh.
This is a phone video he took of one of their last encounters with the China Coast Guard.
Siyempre, malaki yung barko, maliit yung bangka, kahoy lang, bakal. Siyempre, natatakot kami, kaya umalis kami.
And they're going broke. Commercial fishing crews can now only fish close to shore where the catch barely covers their costs.
Sa ngayon, parang nahihirapan talaga kami.
Scarborough Shoal is 220 kilometres from the Philippines mainland and about 900 kilometres from southern China. China seized it in 2012 after a standoff with the Philippine Navy. It's now enforcing a 22-kilometre exclusion zone even for boats seeking shelter from deadly typhoons.
Sa panahon na yun, may yung nawala yung 4 na tao. Ngayon, hindi sila pwedeng pumasok doon dahil linaharang sila ng China. Alanganin naman silang umuwi dito sa tabi dahil medyo malayo na eh. Kaya siguro sila inabot ng lakas, kaya sila nawala.
It was once unthinkable that Chinese ships could threaten them so close to home. The United States was the big power here, with a giant naval base in Subic Bay. But in 1992, the Philippines closed the US bases, which many saw as a colonial relic. China slowly moved in.
Kaya yung gobyerno natin, hindi naman pwedeng girahin natin. Wala rin tayong laban.
Every week, the Philippines government sends reconnaissance flights over China's asserted sovereign territory to challenge the exclusion zones. Today, we're joining one such flight. Now, the Philippines is one of half a dozen neighbouring nations that accuse China of trespassing on their turf, but it's the only one that regularly defies China's control. And that takes some gumption, because out there the arguments about what's legal or illegal don't count for much. The South China Sea has become more like the Wild West, only without a sheriff. An hour after takeoff, our small Cessna plane approaches Scarborough Shoal, a triangle-shaped chain of reefs and rocks around a sheltered lagoon. We spot 2 People's Liberation Army frigates, 1 China Coast Guard ship, and 2 ships from China's maritime militia, supposed fishing ships used by the military to block other vessels. The warnings start immediately.
This is Chinese Naval Warship 552. You are violating China's terror airspace. Leave now. Leave immediately.
The pilots give a rote reply.
This radio message is being recorded. We are free to fly and operate as international law allows. You are way beyond the 200 nautical mile easier per country. Please review your chart.
The Chinese up the pressure.
Well, right now we're being shadowed by a Chinese helicopter, which no one was expecting. The pilots reckon it is too close for safety, but this is all about brinkmanship.
Oh my God!
Without warning, the helicopter comes frighteningly close, passing within 3 meters of our plane.
You are violating China's terror airspace. Leave now. Leave immediately.
It is a stunningly dangerous maneuver. We are flying at just 700 feet, and a collision would see both aircraft crash.
Chinese military helicopter. You are flying too close. You are very dangerous and endangers the lives of our crew and passengers. Keep away and distance your aircraft from us. You are violating the safety standards set by the FAA and ICAO.
As if to show this was no mistake, the helicopter moves in again, coming to within 10 meters. On board is a Chinese photographer taking pictures of us. For nearly an hour, they fly alongside us and sometimes above us until we leave the shoal. By the time we return to Manila, this close encounter has become an international incident. Coast Guard Commodore J. Tariella says if the plane had crashed, it would have constituted an act of war.
The moment that the Filipino fisherman or a Filipino soldier or sailor will get killed, that is the red line. There are international regulations in place, and definitely that kind of action on the part of the Philippine Navy helicopter is a clear violation.
Well, it's not every day you realize how close you came to being killed and almost starting a war.
China's high-risk harassment hasn't just alarmed the Philippines and its neighbours. The South China Sea is one of the world's most important trade routes, with 1/3 of all cargo ships passing through here. The prospect of any nation restricting access has spooked countries from Europe and North Asia to the US and Australia. China makes no secret of harassing any country challenging the exclusion zones. In September 2024, it released this video of a Chinese plane firing flares at a military aircraft, believed to be Australian. A week before our close encounter, China did it again, forcing a Royal Australian Air Force plane to take evasive action.
It seems that they think that they cannot be held accountable.
Scarborough Shoal is just one of multiple potential flashpoints for the Philippines in what it calls the West Philippine Sea. China has claimed the entirety of the Spratly Islands chain and built military bases on 7 reefs, the largest at Mischief Reef. Coral and sediment have been dredged to create artificial land with runways. They have effectively become fixed aircraft carriers and strategic ports, allowing China to project military power over thousands of kilometres.
We have experienced almost all types of aggressions that they can carry out, from water cannoning, blocking, dangerous maneuver, and most recently, high-speed ramming that even damaged our Coast Guard vessel.
This sounds more like piracy. I mean, how would you characterize China's actions?
Well, for the Philippine government, we are just categorizing this as harassment. And China is very innovative and smart to make sure that it doesn't cross the threshold of war.
But it's coming close, isn't it?
Well, they're making sure that these are still actions that are classified as gray zone activities that would not trigger the mutual defense treaty with the United States.
The Philippines is a nation of more than 7,000 islands. China's military stranglehold not only prevents it accessing natural resources, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has argued targeting its seas is an attack on the nation's soul.
The life-giving waters of the West Philippine Sea flow in the blood of every Filipino. We cannot allow anyone to detach it from the totality of the maritime domain that renders our nation whole.
Unable to intimidate China militarily, the Philippines has tried to call it out internationally. Jay Tariella heads what's called the Transparency Program for the West Philippine Sea.
In the Philippines, we choose to publicize all those unlawful activities that the Chinese government is doing.
That includes holding international conferences to highlight China's actions.
What they're doing is something that is a concern for everybody, for the European Union, for the Australians, for the Japanese. It's because it's the global order that they are attacking right now.
Our next member of the panel is Captain Liu Xiaobo, a retired member of the People's Liberation Army Navy of China. He's the director.
This conference in Manila in November included representatives from Chinese think tanks.
China have refrained from using the force, even though China has that capability.
China's inability to accept.
Facing down criticism from Asian and Western countries.
Although you mentioned, Captain Liu, that China has not applied a use of force, that behaviour has put at risk the lives of many people, including Australians, some of which are my friends and colleagues.
China's threat cannot...
Professor Hu Bo is a maritime analyst from Peking University.
What is the Chinese conception of a threat or use of force?
Do you think that
he says attending these conferences is like being a punching bag.
They are blame China, just blame China. So that doesn't make sense. If everything is China's fault, what's the meaning of this kind of dialogue?
Blaming China is the one thing other South China Sea nations seem to agree on. Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, Vietnam, Taiwan and the Philippines all have claims on the sea, many of them overlapping. But China says its claim trumps them all. It's called the 9-dash line. Literally 9 hand-drawn dashes around the entire shoreline.
Some of China's neighbors say many islands and reefs claimed by China belong to them. China stresses that its fishermen were the first explorers in the South China Sea.
Chinese state media claim ancient maps naming reefs and islands prove China has had sovereignty for centuries.
事实上，是这些国家非法侵占的这些岛礁，
It's a myth, right? This is about trying to territorialise that area, trying to persuade people or to make it normal to think of the South China Sea as being part of China. You know, this is part of the reason why it's on passports now, right? You want to get that image out there so that it becomes more legitimate. And so part of what states like the Philippines are doing, but also the US allies and partners, Japan, Australia, and so on, are trying to do, is to make sure that that never becomes normal.
I think different countries have different ideas about the boundaries and the claims, but the point is that we should negotiate and settle them peacefully.
But at the moment, it seems to be based on force.
China doesn't like that, but China has no choice but to respond.
China's claim to historic rights makes no sense to Filipino communities that have fished the seas around them for generations. Critics claim it contravenes the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which gives coastal states a 370-kilometre exclusive economic zone. Now, for what it's worth, maritime law appears to be on the Philippines' side, because in 2016 an international court in The Hague not only rejected China's 9-dash claim, it found the disputed rocks and reefs are inside the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. That means China has no legal right to build bases on the reefs, to stop Filipino fishermen going out to them, or anyone flying over them, which sounds like a great win for the Philippines. Problem is, China rejects the ruling, and out on the South China Sea, it's almost impossible to enforce it.
We think that is the judgment nonsense, you know. China must do the law enforcement activities if the Philippines continue to change China's bottom line.
Well, you're enforcing Chinese law, but you're breaking international law.
Which kind of international law?
The Law of the Sea Treaty, the Arbitral Court in The Hague.
Arbitration doesn't decide the future belong to Philippines.
But they did decide who had the exclusive economic zone. They said the Philippines. So you have no right to interfere with any Filipino boats going about their lawful business in their own economic zone.
We have also the international law, like UN Charter. In UN Charter, the sovereignty of the states should be respected.
In other words, China believes it's fully within its legal rights when it does things like this. In fact, it's become even more assertive since the Hague ruling.
It is no longer sufficient to simply characterize China's malicious activity in the West Philippine Sea as mere violations or incidents or even incursions, because we're well beyond that. So,
one of China's most vocal critics at these meetings is Ray Powell, a former US military attaché to Vietnam and Australia.
This is essentially a maritime occupation of a country's lawful exclusive economic zone by a hostile, even imperialist foreign power.
In the dark space here, this is all the Philippines' legal exclusive economic zone.
He now runs a maritime monitoring unit at Stanford University that records and publicizes Chinese ship movements in the disputed areas.
So we do a lot of ship tracking. We try to keep up with where China is deploying. In particular, China is deploying its maritime militia and China Coast Guard. And so that's what you see here is mostly those ships in and around their large base at Mischief Reef here.
His group Sealight tracks each ship's automatic identification system that transmits location, speed, and course. So it's like a busy military highway in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, and I would say, up until a couple years ago, this would have been much, much quieter.
Sealight has charted a massive build-up since the summer of 2023, with Chinese ships swarming any Philippine Navy or Coast Guard ships.
So you can see over here, we've got these two Philippine ships that come from two different directions. And you've also got some Chinese maritime militia coming down from the north to add to this first line of defense that's formed here. The second line of defense has already formed back here. I mean, if China decides they're not getting through, they're not getting through.
He says before this tracking system, the public couldn't see what China was doing.
China is the most sophisticated gray zone operator the world has ever seen. I mean, they have really sort of perfected the art, and the South China Sea as a whole was their playground.
The Philippines has started a new round of provocation against China in the South China Sea.
China has pushed back on social media, portraying boat blocking as measured law enforcement, including at Scarborough Shoal, which it calls Huangyan Island.
China has announced the baseline of its territorial waters around Huangyan Island and submitted it to the United Nations.
And now, multiple Philippine vessels have crossed into China's water around the island. China's response, they use water cannons. Experts told us this was a gentle measure, a warning, not a confrontation.
If there is one part of this dispute that defies reason, it's this. An international battle over a scuttled ship on an underwater reef 200 kilometres out to sea. In 1999, the Philippines grounded a decommissioned ship called Sierra Madre to stop China seizing the reef. By late morning, we're in sight of the disputed reef, which the Filipinos call... 11 years ago, I was one of the first and last journalists to be allowed to visit the reef before the Philippines military deemed it too dangerous. We had to run a blockade of Coast Guard ships to reach it. Well, it looks like we've made it because, well, the Coast Guard vessel is still coming towards us at speed. The reef here now is so shallow that I don't think they can follow us. On board was a unit of Filipino Marines living off whatever fish they could catch. The Philippines Armed Forces had to airdrop any supplies. The China Coast Guard circled like sharks. At the time, I doubted the ship would last another 6 months. It was literally rusting away. But it's not only still there. In 2024, it brought China and the Philippines to the very brink of lethal conflict.
It is imperative that the supplies be delivered to BRP Sierra Madre to support our soldiers stationed there.
Chinese troops used hand-to-hand combat to stop the resupply mission. A Filipino sailor lost a thumb in the melee. All this over a reef that, and this has to be emphasized, is underwater.
China kind of got themselves into a place where if they took a step back, if they were seen to back down or to let up, that might encourage more of this.
None of the other claimant nations has faced such concerted harassment. Most have chosen to quietly negotiate with China. ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, has steadfastly declined the Philippines' urging to condemn China's actions.
Honestly, a lot of it is it's like a protection racket. You know, it's I want you to be safe from me. So if you just give me a little bit of your sovereignty, you'll be very safe from me. And everybody else, but especially me.
Nice economic zone. Shame
Exactly.
if something happened to it.
Exactly.
What the Chinese is doing this is they are actually jeopardizing the global order that we all enjoy. And that is what is at stake here.
President, I just wanted to ask...
It's a challenging time to be putting faith in the rules-based global order.
You have to be thankful. You don't have the cards.
Donald Trump has already withdrawn security guarantees for America's allies in Europe.
What if a bomb drops on your head right now?
The Philippines hopes his tough anti-China rhetoric will cement the US commitment to Asia. But regional security analyst Beck Strating says it's now hard to be certain of anything.
When you're a junior alliance partner, you're always worried about what your big ally partner is going to do and whether or not it is going to stick around in the region, whether or not it will come to your defence should you need it. And these sort of concerns are only likely to be exacerbated by a Trump administration.
So far, Trump's election hasn't caused China to ease back. What we saw in our flight over Scarborough Shoal suggests the opposite. That China can now see a future where might is right.
The current administration of the Philippines wants to use the competition between China and the US to advance its maritime rights in the so-called West Philippine Sea. So I think it's a very, very dangerous game.
You don't think China's playing a dangerous game?
China is a big power. China, US, they can play game, but the Philippines, I don't think the Philippines can have the capability to play this kind of game.
Back in Subic Bay, this community has also learned a lesson.
Ang China, hindi nila ginagalang yung batas natin. Wala rin tayong magagawa.
In a world of big power politics, they count for nothing.
If only there was a well in the village of Tattaguin, then Abdulaziz Ndiaye would not be trying to go to Spain.
I can grow salads, carrots, beans and onions. I could earn enough to feed my family and not have to go to Europe.
Hoping to fund a well, Ndiaye applied for the seasonal visa scheme to work on farms in Spain. The leaders of the two countries revived a 2-decade-long seasonal work visa scheme in 2024 to curb illegal migration. A record 47,000, mostly Africans, arrived illegally in Spain last year. Many end up working in the fields.
Bring water here, grow crops, and stop the flow of migration so that people can have opportunities right here on their land.
Weeks have passed with no news. He fears that his application has not been processed. With it comes the realization of having lost the possibilities of a new life.
A weekly look at the world's top business stories.
How do you see then the relationship with China developing over the course of the Trump administration?
From global markets and economies.
The big question here, is the yen still a safe haven currency?
To understand how it affects our daily lives.
33,000 workers are still on strike. Could it face a credit rating downgrade as a result?
Counting the cost on Al Jazeera.
The UN humanitarian agency says nearly 2/3 of Gaza is off limits to Palestinians because of Israel's expanding attacks and forced displacement orders. I'm Cyril Vanier. It's great to have you with us. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha. Also coming up,
continued U.S. commitment to our strong transatlantic alliance remains the bedrock of our security.
The NATO Secretary General stresses the need for member states to do their fair share for security ahead of a crucial meeting. Calling it a grave betrayal, South Korea's top court removes impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol from office after he declared martial law last year. And Asian stocks slide after Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs trigger fears of a global recession and hit markets worldwide. After more than a year